very much for that introduction. So today we're so glad to be talking about voting rights and making sure everybody knows exactly what to do with voting, because voting in 2020, just like everything else in 2020, is very different than it ever has been at any other point. So today, Aleeia and I are extremely happy to have two terrific guests with us. First, we have Miguelina Camilo, who is a commissioner with the New York City Board of Elections for Bronx County. She's also the principal at Camilo Law Firm PC, as well as the immediate past president of the Dominican Bar Association and current president of the Bronx Women's Bar Association. We also have the lovely Tanya BlaQue, who makes sure I don't say the wrong things and look like I quasi know what I'm doing multiple times a week. She's the chair of the National Bar Association's Region 2 Election Committee. She is senior counsel at a leading labor and employment company, and she is former president of the Association of Black Women Attorneys. So let's jump into this, because there's a whole lot that we really want to be able to discuss in a short amount of time. So voting, right? We're talking about voting, but let's make sure we kind of ground this the way it is. So why is voting important? Why should people be making sure that they go out there and vote, whether it's by absentee, early voting, or just going to the polls on election day? Yeah, Miguelina?
Sure. So thank you for allowing us to have this discussion on a very important topic. And I've been speaking a lot about voting, and that is always the first question. Why is it important to vote? Now, I would think it'd be somewhat obvious. There's a lot going on. 2020, as you said, is an unprecedented year, and many of these issues affect us. These issues that are being discussed by these candidates: healthcare, climate change, student debt, and it doesn't make any good, or it's not a good use of your time to just complain about it or post about it. Your voice matters, your vote matters. So that's why voting is important, because that's how you can actually effectuate change. One vote can really make a difference.
Yeah, right.
I would only add to that to say, right, your voice doesn't have much credence, and opinion doesn't have much standing if you haven't participated in voting. Right, you can argue, you can take positions on things, but if you're not active in the fight, then we can't put much credibility and credence to your statements. Right, we understand we're in a situation where people may feel their vote doesn't matter, but yet and still, right, it may not matter. We can't be so temporally minded. We need to be long term and be persistent. Right, if our forefathers didn't vote in the past, we wouldn't have this opportunity presently. So we don't owe it to, it's not only about us, we owe it to a larger group. We're planting seeds of which we may not see the fruits of its labor, but our next generations will.
Right, definitely.
So I wanted to ask, what are the qualifications for you to be able to vote? Who's allowed to vote?
Sure. So must be 18 years old, although New York allows you to register if you're 16 or 17. You must be a U.S. citizen, and you must be able to state that you're not going to vote anywhere else. Your residential address, wherever you've resided the last 30 days at least in New York, that's where you'll be allowed to vote. And of course, you do have to be registered. Right. If you're a registered voter, we will have a voter profile for you, and your name will be waiting when you go to the polls to vote.
So you don't have to be you can be in high school and register to vote for whenever you're eligible for when you turn 18. Good to know.
Correct. So you'll register, we'll create a profile for you, but you must be 18 at the time
to cast the ballot. Makes sense.
Right, exactly. So this is the first year that that it went into effect that people can actually pre-register. And so folks, for example, a lot of folks who are juniors in high school, if they're 16, then they're able to pre-register. So that way, when the year that they're going to be turning 18, they're already registered to vote.
Oh.
So any high school students who are hearing this, make sure you take note. The deadline was October 9th. So that was the deadline to be able to register for this election, but obviously there are more elections to come. So even if you miss that deadline, it's still important to make sure you register that you can be able to participate in the next one. And next year, there are going to be a ton of elections, York, when you talk about mayor, controller, borough presidents, 2/3 of the city council members out there, it's going to be a lot to do. So you want to make sure that you're participating in making sure we know exactly what's going on, like in our communities. Yeah. So another thing that comes to mind when we're talking about voting is, the political party, right? And, this isn't to say, what political party someone should actually choose. But one of the things I noticed when myself and some of the folks at SEQ Legal were registering people to vote, some people didn't want to always put that there because they didn't want people to know what their political party was. Can you explain a little bit more what that means when it says, or why you may decide to choose a political party when you're registering to vote?
It's interesting to me, but of course, it's interesting that people would not want to declare a political party at the outset, because if you're registering to vote, you care about what's going on and you actually want to have a part in the debate. Of course, we know our major parties are Democrat and Republican, but we do have a few other smaller parties. One of the larger parties now growing up is the Working Families Party is also one. So I would simply say it's beneficial to register with a party because that will dictate your ability to vote in a primary.
Right.
For example, we just had a primary this past June. It was a Democratic primary where we were selecting our Democratic candidate for the presidential seat. And some people tried to go and register, and because they had not declared, they had simply left it blank when they registered to vote, they were not eligible. Their name was not there when they tried to go vote. So that really is the principal reason why we ask for registration, because it may limit your ability to vote in certain elections.
I'll add, just to piggyback off of that. I mean, I think the reality is, unfortunately, we've gotten to a situation in which once you identify with a political party, right, you're labeled as associated with that political party, and thus agree automatically with all the views of that political party, right? So that's the hesitation. And I know many people don't agree with all of the ideologies of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. There may be a lot of people that are independent, but to Miguelina's point, right, you should identify, at least on paper, with a party so that you're not missing out on these most pivotal elections, one being the primaries, because you will self-exclude yourself. That doesn't mean that don't adopt the labeling that individuals place on you with respect to, right, being a Democrat or a Republican.
That's so true. I know so many people who are so invested in Bernie versus Biden and all these people, and they showed up to be a part of it and to cast their vote, and they weren't eligible. They never registered for a party.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that, I mean, just because you pick a political party, let's say in the general election, you can vote for anyone you want to vote for. Mm-hmm. You can also change your party at particular times as well. So, it just gives you more options. So this is something folks should probably just keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So how do people know where they should go and vote?
Great question. And I'll jump in on here only because it's interesting. When you first, I would advise people to identify whether they're registered to vote first, right? So all of this, like preparing for a voting plan, make sure you're checking, are you registered to vote? There is a website that you can go on to check, and it's called voterlookup.election.ny.gov, right? NY, not New York spelled out, ny.gov. That's the first step in you checking to see whether you're registered to vote. How do I know where I vote? Similar process. Technology is wonderful. So now we have another website that you can go to determine where do I vote specifically, and that's finding pollsite.vote.nyc.
Yes.
And I'm sure you will share this information. I'm happy to put it on like a flyer, and I'm sure it's probably been shared all over, but these are very important websites to use and tools to use in not only identifying whether you're registered to vote as a part of your voting plan, but where you're actually going to vote.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, another question that actually comes up pretty often has to do with folks who are justice involved. So, let's say you have a felony conviction. Does that mean that you're not barred to vote at all after you're released, or what does that look like, Miguelina?
Sure. So if you have been convicted of a felony and are actually in the process of running your sentence, so whether you're incarcerated or on probation, your right to vote is temporarily suspended. You cannot vote while you're carrying out that sentence. Once that is actually completed, so let's say you completed your term of probation, then you must go and re-register so you can vote. Okay, that is what it is on you to go re-register so that your profile is activated again, because it was suspended once you were convicted of the charge. So it's not an absolute denial forever that you cannot vote. It just requires that extra step of re-registering.
Okay. Now, what about if it's not a felony, but let's say we're talking about a misdemeanor conviction?
Right. So I don't know, Tanya, if you wanted to add anything.
I did just to the parole or having a felony, right? New York, Governor Cuomo in, I guess, 2018, I believe it is, came out with legislation understanding the huge ramifications that voting for people who had prior convictions or that were actually serving felonies had, right, on the voting demographics within certain regions, right? We already know the predominant number of individuals incarcerated are people, brown and Black people. So they came up with a program, and it's very selective, and you have to apply for it. But if you are out on parole, there can be a partial pardon. And there are qualifications that you have to meet in order to be pardoned by the governor to allow you to, one, register and then also vote. Okay. I'm not sure if that's known because I haven't seen it advertised many places, just like the sealing program hasn't been advertised as much as it should either. But that is a process that's in play, or a law that was in play, and that's another opportunity. Everyone doesn't qualify for it. There are certain eligibility requirements for it, but that is another way in which to encourage people who have served their sentence and may be out on parole and just for a certain period of time that they have to complete their sentence, that they can have an opportunity to vote.
See, there we go. You're getting a Black Resource Network and SEQ Legal exclusive.
Yeah, I didn't know. Can you repeat the name of that program?
Sure, I'll show. I'll let me just get the name while Miguelina answers the misdemeanor question. I'll get the name.
That's a wonderful point, Tanya, and that is on our website of vote.nyc, your requirements to be able to vote. And
okay.
This specifying that one of the exceptions is if you get that pardon. So it's great that Tanya will offer, exactly that program, that it is available. The other type of conviction, if it's a misdemeanor conviction, there you actually would be able to still register to vote. If you haven't registered and you are convicted of a misdemeanor and still carrying out your sentence, either probation or even a jail term, you are still able to register to vote.
Good to know. Great.
Yeah, so super important for our community to understand that any type of contact with the criminal justice system, it's not going to bar you from ever voting again. So
very good to know.
Great to highlight that. Yes.
Plus, I'm having technical difficulties and can't find it, but I'll get it for you.
No problem.
Just saw it, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
So my next question is, when you're going to vote, what do you need to bring with you? Do you have to bring your passport, your social security card? What do you need to bring?
In New York, you should bring a pen.
It depends. In New York City, our polling sites actually now have a stylus and a pen. It's one thing, and you get to keep it.
Yes, you do. I love those. Yeah.
Lessening the contact. So I'm happy that was one of the things that the Board of Elections was able to provide. A pen for each person that's going. Definitely that's necessary. Right. The stylus is used to check in because we now have poll pads. So that's where you look up your information to make sure you're in the right place. And then it's a pen that you can use to fill out your ballot and scan it into the machine. But I'll just add, we also do have, I have to, promote vote.nyc. We also do have a fast pass, which we mailed out to our registered voters. It looks like a shopping coupon card.
I got that in the mail. Yes. It looks like the key food thing that you put on your keychain. Yes.
Bring that with you. Yeah, bring that with you. It has a barcode. So when you go to our poll pads. You can scan the barcode and your information will pop up. And it also has two numbers. It has your election district and your assembly district.
Yeah.
Those are the table numbers that you see hanging around in the poll site.
Mhm.
And you could walk around not knowing where to go. Your Fast Pass is going to tell you where to go. So that is really the most important thing. And just to add, because some people believe they have to bring identification all the time, that is not correct. You just need your name and address to confirm you're at the right poll site, and to actually be found in the registration materials that you're at the right place. There is the exception for the first-time voters that did not complete their voting profile. So if their voting profile is missing some information, the poll worker is actually going to have, it's going to come up that you require ID because it's your first time voting and your profile is not complete. So they have to ask you for something additional to confirm that you're eligible to vote.
Got it. Easy enough.
Okay, great. So one of the things we're probably going to see a ton of people in participating this year is in absentee voting, right? Especially with COVID happening, there's just going to be a whole lot more people voting, or it's likely to be a lot more people voting absentee. But it's important that you know exactly what you're doing so that your vote actually gets counted. So, you know, let's start with this. You know, what exactly is absentee voting? And once you've completed your ballot, where should you submit the ballot to?
I'll kick that off. So one, we want to use the terms absentee voting or mail-in voting, right? So they are synonymous, so people understand that's what we're talking about when we're talking about absentee voting. And under the law, there are certain circumstances that qualify for you to vote either absentee, i.e. by mail, if those circumstances are present. One exception that has been made as a portion of that circumstance is COVID-19, of course, right? And the safety surrounding COVID-19. So what absentee ballots or mail-in voting allows you to do is to cast your vote by mail. And that's the long and short of how absentee ballots work. There is a process. You need to request an absentee ballot. The deadline to request the absentee ballot is, I believe, October 27th. Okay. But don't wait to the deadline to request your absentee ballot. You should actually request your absentee ballot immediately. This goes back to having a voting plan to request your absentee ballot. Make sure you read all of the instructions on an absentee ballot. You sign and date the envelope that the absentee ballot is supposed to be placed in. And then the absentee ballot can be placed at any drop box that's available around the city. You can also put in your absentee ballot in early voting, which I know we'll talk about on October 24th through November 2nd, or November 1, excuse me. And then also you can actually drop your absentee ballot off on November 3rd at the voting booth. There's a slot for you to drop your absentee ballot off there. And then of course, the more obvious, if you're going with absentee ballot or mail-in voting, is by mail. Just note that it needs to be postmarked by November 3rd. Your absentee ballot must be postmarked by November 3rd.
Got it.
Okay.
I just want to, one little point about the drop-off boxes. Thank you so much, Tanya, for highlighting that, because this is really the first election that we're going to have that in New York. Those are secure boxes. They're property of the Board of Elections. Those ballots that are dropped off in that box will be returned to our office each day and will be processed the same way as any of the other ballots that are being received by mail. Those boxes are right now available at all our local offices. So each borough has their own office. They have a drop box. Once early voting starts, every single early voting site will have a drop box. And you can go to any one of those sites and drop off your ballot, even if it's outside your county, right? They will do the work to redistribute it to the correct place. And then on general voting day, general election day, you can go to your general site. They will have a drop box and you could just drop it off.
Oh, it's good to know. And just as a quick follow-up, because I know this is a question I hear all the time. Once you've submitted your ballot absentee or mailed in your ballot, is there a way to know for sure that your ballot was counted and is being processed, or is it just once you send it out there, you just kind of have to hope that there aren't any issues and that it eventually is counted by the Board of Elections?
Right. So again, for the first time this election cycle, we are going to have confirmation numbers on those absentee ballots that you receive through the mail. Upon your request, you get a confirmation number. And that will tell you once it's been mailed out to you and once it's been received by our office. So we are adding that to our system for the first time. So you'll be able to track it.
Got it. I know some other questions we had, we talked about it a little earlier, but I'd like to expand on it, is early voting. So what is early voting? Like, people can just vote before election day. What is that?
Do you want to start off, Miguelina, or should I? Okay. It's so funny because early voting has been in New York. It's not new to New York at all, right? Early voting has been around. It hasn't been advertised. But early voting provides a window of time for voters to go in and cast their ballots before election day. Early voting in New York starts on October 24th, 2020. That's a Saturday, which is also a perk for purposes of voting. And then it ends on November 1, which is a Sunday, for purposes of early voting. The difference between early voting and election day voting is also where you vote. You have to be able to identify where you vote. It's not your typical polling place or polling site that you would typically cast your vote during a general election. The hours for the sites being open is something else that you have to be mindful of if you are going to choose to vote early. And also I'll say is, of course, all of the other suggestions that we had back to earlier saying having a voting plan. If you plan to vote early, and I encourage folks to actually vote early in this election, to be quite honest with you. We are in a unique circumstance. We've seen everything in the news with respect to absentee or mailing ballots and them trying to discredit or question the ability of the U.S. Postal Service to actually have the ballots transmitted, or the security in transmitting those ballots. So I implore folks to actually take advantage of this early voting opportunity, which is, it's on a Saturday or a Sunday. You don't have an excuse, right? There's no excuse. Typically when it's election day, I'm not a morning person, so I ain't getting up at 6. And typically I'm still at work or at an event, right? Going to 9. So I'm trying to rush to get home to get right to the polls before they close at 9 o'clock. So.
All right, good. There's no excuses then.
Right. That's really the benefit. We have 2 long days, meaning we'll close later on around 8 or 9 p.m. And we have 2 early days where we'll be open by 7 in the morning. So the schedule is very flexible, that sometime in those 9 days, you can find, what is most convenient for you to go vote. The benefit is there's usually no line or shorter line. There's less people you're going to have contact with. And we love it. We, Board of Elections, love it because it alleviates the pressure of the general election day, right?
Yeah,
If those lines won't be as long, hopefully, because we've already covered most of our voters during early voting. So like Tanya said too, we are late in really promoting it. New York is actually one of the later states to take on early voting. We just took on that practice really last year in our main elections, and we have seen it's a great benefit.
Just to circle up on Miguelina's point, to where do you find voting places? Like Miguelina talked about early, they're open earlier on certain days or extend their hours on other days. I'm going to give you another website. VoteEarlyNY.org. VoteEarlyNY.org. You can go there, you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you the locations in which you can actually access early voting.
So where you vote early, it will not be where you vote on election day. Those are 2 separate places. So you need to find out where they are depending on your voting plan.
That's correct.
Got it.
Yes.
I like it. Voting plan, yeah.
Voting plan.
That's right.
Yeah. And if you happen to see someone out here with an SEQ legal shirt giving you information about early voting and where your poll site may be, definitely come up and we'll be passing those out just like we were doing and registering voters, before the deadline on October 9th.
Yeah.
I want a shirt. That's great.
Right.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yep. So one of the things we also hear a lot about, whether it's just on the news or maybe people have anecdotal stories that go to this, really has to do with voter suppression and people wondering or worried that someone's going to try to figure out a way to essentially disenfranchise them, make sure that they don't have a vote in this upcoming election. What should someone do if they go to their polling place? They plan and they're ready to vote, and someone says that they're not permitted to vote.
Tanya, go for it, and then I'll
Should I?
add.
Okay.
I want to hear what you
One, hopefully you've done your plan and you're registered and you know everything is right, top notch, and you don't have an issue. Now, if you go to a polling place and they're saying you can't register for whatever reason, and you know that you are registered to vote, they say you can't cast your ballot for whatever reason, and they know that you're eligible to vote, you should demand an affidavit or a provisional ballot. Okay. Don't leave that voting place without completing an affidavit, ballot, or provisional ballot, which is what it's called in New York State. What that does is you will be filling out a provisional ballot. And even if you have an error, let's say, on your voter registration, which may have been the impetus for them basically saying you can't vote, let's say you changed your address or something of that nature. You fill out your provisional ballot, you put that new address in, not only will your provisional ballot count towards your vote, it actually will update your registration, right? So your provisional ballot now, you will not have to send in later on a modified or edited voter registration to change your address. It automatically updates that, right? And replaces your old registration that you had. So to the extent that that happens, you need to be adamant. As I understand it in the past, there's some individuals at the polls that monitor the polls and work at the polls that are less inclined to want to provide you with these provisional ballots because, it's extra work, right? It's paperwork that they have to count. That's something you may have to be a little bit forceful in demanding. Do not leave the voting place. And if you do have a problem, you need to call a voting hotline so that you can get some support for any problems that you have.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And actually, I would just add to that too. So for example, I know the New York State Attorney General's office has an election protection hotline. I believe that National Bar Association is going to be doing some election protection work. I know that with SEQ Legal, we're going to be seeing if we can have some attorneys at some of these early voting and general voting locations to make sure there are people who can help in these areas. So, make sure if you aren't sure about something that there's someone you speak with who may be able to help you. Because like Tanya saying, you want to make sure that you cast a ballot that day. You don't want to leave there and not have done so because, just frankly, too many people have done too much to make sure that we're in a situation like this where we can be able to vote. So want to make sure that that happens.
I just want to dovetail on your voter suppression question, right? Because NBA Region 2 is also doing a panel. There are also, we're monitoring even social media for purposes of suppression of voting. And some of it could be as simple as giving you the wrong date of early voting, the wrong date of when it ends, right? The wrong polling location, simple thing, you requiring an ID when you really don't need one. Simple things like that it's misinformation and some of it's disinformation that's going out on social media. And since that's, I guess, the new news, there are individuals that are volunteering. If you want to volunteer, please let me know, to monitor social media to verify that we have a fair and nonpartisan election process.
And if I could just add on behalf of the Board of Elections, our poll workers are tasked with doing everything they can. They're instructed. Every person needs to have the ability to vote. They have to do everything in their power to look up the registration and try to direct them to the correct poll site if they are at the wrong poll site. And typically that is the issue. It is not that they're not registered to vote, it's they're in the wrong location. And now for this election, with the expectation that it's going to be such a high turnout, we are actually enlisting workers to be line management coordinators. So we are going to have people paying attention to the lines, coming around and saying, what's your name and address? Okay, you're at the right place. You're going to go to this election district and this assembly district. And they're going to be giving you that information that's on your fast pass, right? We're going to have workers that are designated just to make sure that the lines, the people in line, are in the right place and are going to the right table.
Okay, that makes things easier.
Great.
So this was a hot topic last election with the popular vote versus the Electoral College. Can you just explain what that is, what the Electoral College is, and why we use it?
Right, and I'll take that on and try to explain it. It's a complicated process, and I'm going to simplify it as much as I can, but understand that there are other aspects of this process for purposes of Electoral College that are very significant and important to how it was developed. So the Electoral College, in the process of when we were creating, right, the colonies and the Constitution, there was a question as to, right, how will we select or elect the President of the United States? And there was discussion between, right, the four founders on how that process would work. We all know and understand, right, like in the colonies and the countries that were a part, or the states that were a part of the United States at that time, we already know that there were enslaved Black people that were a huge portion of the South's population, okay? And that played a significant role. The 3/5 clause or 3/5 law was definitely directly related to this Electoral College. And what does that mean? The Electoral College is a group, is basically 536, I believe, 538, excuse me, electoral votes. And the person that's running for president, the one to first get 270 votes will become the president. Each state has a certain amount of electoral votes designated to the state. The way the states actually get votes designated to them is supposed to be based upon the state's population. Well, we weren't human beings, or right, we weren't even 3/5 of a person when that happened. The only reason we became 3/5 of a person was so that certain states could get more electoral votes and thus be successful, or have more votes and thus be successful during a presidential election. So that's the really high level. What it's supposed, there are delegates. So your popular vote, right, is cast. And then there are delegates assigned to each state that is going to essentially cast the electoral votes for that state. New York, for example, has 29 electoral votes. We have delegates or electorates that will cast those electoral votes. They are really supposed to be the conduit for the popular vote, right? So it's supposed to be the popular vote within New York State, let's say elected, candidate A. It goes to the delegates that are going to cast our Electoral College votes. That person is supposed to cast the votes that are similar to or reflect what the popular vote is.
Yeah.
It's funny because as you do research, you'll say, this is what you're supposed to do. They shall. And then as time comes on, it's like, it's likely that they will cast the vote in alignment with, right? And I remember when I was in John Jay College, and I learned about this, and the first time that I experienced this happen was Bush and Gore. And I vividly remember my government teacher saying, it will never be a situation, ever, that the popular vote, the person wins the popular vote and not the electoral vote. That very year,
Why would they say that though? I mean, it's just a mathematical,
right, it happened at least 5 times from what I understand. But I can understand why people would say, well, typically this doesn't happen, right? Because you're a conduit for that particular group. For example, Rhode Island only has 3 electoral votes, right? I think was the question asked as to why do we even need the Electoral College in and of itself. right, is one, you have more people, right, across various states, right? I'm sure there, you know, if you did an assessment or an amendment to the Constitution, which we all know is very challenging to do, you know, Rhode Island would want more than 3 electoral votes, right? Given their population. New York would want more than 29 electoral votes. And the way they are assigned, before I forget this, is based upon the 2 senators that are assigned to the state and the number of congressional representatives assigned to your particular state. So that's how New York has 29. They have 2 senators and the remaining 27 House of Representative individuals. And that's how each state has their electoral vote assigned to them back since 1770, right? This is when these electoral votes were assigned, and we are in 2020.
Yes.
So,
and to bring this full circle, that's also a reason why, you know, participating in the census, you know, is so important.
Yes.
To make sure that people, that we're able to hold on to our own political power, so that when we want to be able to make sure that policies are in place that protect people in all our communities, to make sure that we're being represented. So hopefully everybody who's watching this filled out a census form as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
But understanding that this all was rooted in, right, racism, right, the 3 First Compromise, so that the slaves could be counted, so that they can get these, like, that should motivate you in and of itself.
Yeah, the Great Compromise.
To want to participate in this process.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I'll say, I was actually putting together a PowerPoint for a high school class that I'm going to do a presentation about voting. Just some facts. George Washington, the first president, was voted in by 6% of the population. He won 6% of the vote. And we obviously know the struggle of the different communities, African-American community especially, to get the right to vote. And still the racism that happens to this day with voter disenfranchisement and going to these different poll sites. Women, we weren't allowed to vote 100 years ago. We were granted that right. We celebrated 100 years now, August 2020. So all those struggles, if anyone has any doubt of why is voting important, just look at our history and how much people have fought for that right. And it is not something that we should discount. You know, it's something that is our right as US citizens to vote.
Yeah, not even look at our present, you know, exactly what we're seeing right now today. If you want things different, you got to make sure you go out and vote, you know, not just say that things had to change, or not to say that, you know, your vote doesn't count in some type of way, because it does, you know, you know, it's just extremely important. So yeah, and I think we're kind of getting close to our time. Aleeia, do you have any final questions?
Yeah, that's it. I want you to kind of revisit one thing you spoke about earlier, and before we wrap this up, we all know the presidential race is in November. What other seats will be on everyone's ballot? Jason, I know you talked about that, so that's an easy one for you.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I mean, certain things that definitely come to mind is, well, for this year, you know, we definitely have a lot of judges are on there, right? So there are a ton of judicial positions, and it's so important that you think about that, just because, you know, it's important that we have, you know, we elect a president, but there are a lot of things that happen on a local level that impact our lives when we're talking about a criminal justice system, when we talk about, you know, our healthcare system, when we're talking about there's people picking up the trash, you know, on our street, and some of these things, you know, the people who we elect to these positions, you know, have a huge role in determining what services we have and who's advocating for issues that are important to us. I know a couple of others that may come up for example, I know in Queens, there's a Queensborough president's race there as well. I believe there's state assembly and Senate races on there. So there are a few. I don't know if there are any that I missed that Miguelina and Tanya can think about, but those are some of them that are definitely on the ballots. Make sure you don't just vote in the presidential, but also all the other elections and all the other spaces that you see on the ballot.
I would make one final plug for vote.nyc. If you want to be really prepared, go on the website, look up your address, and your sample ballot is on there.
Got it.
Go eat at a restaurant. I like to look at the menu at home. I know what I'm going to order. So you can do that with voting. You can look up your sample ballot and say, okay, these are the people I'm going to look for. I'm going to vote for. Because sometimes we'll even have, at least for like the judges, you can select 3 or 2. And if you don't know that going in, you may just choose one. So it's
Right.
good to go to NYC, put in your address, look up your sample ballot, and you're ready to go. You walk in, you already know who you're gonna vote for.
Be an
Right.
informed voter instead of the eeny, meeny, miny, mo, some people are kind of doing.
That's right.
Right, exactly.
And those judges are on the ballot just to bring it home are the judges that you'll see in criminal and state criminal court and civil court in your neighborhoods. Okay, so you need to know what experience they have in order to sit in your specific neighborhoods. They're the ones that are interpreting the legislation, and in some instances, interpreting it incorrectly, or even basically, if there's no legislation, starting new law.
Yeah.
So that is why it's important. Only thing I wanted to circle back to, because I finally found it, because my phone started working.
Hey.
The executive order that I believe was extended, it's called Restore Voting Rights to New Yorkers on Parole. And it's restore right to vote after release from incarceration. It's an executive order that was signed in 2018. I believe it was extended since then. So that's something that you can go on and look up to the extent you have family or friends that are in that particular predicament.
Wonderful.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's our time for this.
Yeah.
Our very first Black Resource Network and SEQ legal session. So thank you, Miguelina. Thank you, Tanya, for providing some very important and very timely information. Aleeia, how do you think we did today?
I mean, I learned a lot. I know I'm going to go be an informed voter, and I learned to have a voting plan. So I'm going to put all of those things out and make sure everybody hears about it, and we are prepared voters.
Great, great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to today's show. And just remember, make sure you vote, because if you don't vote, you can't count. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.